Not only is it so important to make mistakes so we can learn from them, but unless we are in an organizational culture where we have the safety to share our mistakes, others will not get to learn from our mistakes. And so you will have your teams learning the same lessons over and over again through the same expensive mistakes over and over again. So if you have a culture where mistakes are allowed to be made without punishment and people are safe enough to share those mistakes, the learning that you can enable will be exponentially faster and more robust than an organization where people operate from a place of self-protection. So leadership teams, they need to also include input from employees that are delivering care or services on the ground, because without those employee voices in the room, executives are at risk of creating incomplete or even harmful metrics. And to give a recent example, I have been advising one of the largest health systems in the United States. One of the aspects of this work is around improving the procurement process. So the organization implemented metrics around the time to close for procurement tickets, and procurement officers became under pressure to have a short duration of those tickets. So what happened? They would close the tickets without completing the customer's request, open a new ticket, and start the process all over again. So what was the North Star here should have been customer satisfaction. But by measuring at an individualistic level, the organization accidentally directly created a great degree of customer dissatisfaction. And that's why it's so important to consider the collective impact of any metrics that will be implemented.
Hello, everyone. My name is Tim Mikilashvili. I'm your host of the Alloutcoach podcast, also CEO of Amadev Pharma, an analytics and organizational change agency serving life sciences. Today, I have a special guest, Ellie Holbert, founder and principal of Empact Advisory Services, who's very familiar with high performance. She graduated with summa cum laude from University of Maryland and magna cum laude from University of Michigan, a feat that I'm going to ask her about later. She's a scientist, a researcher, an expert in management consulting, and has helped many organizations within healthcare and beyond and other industries unlock the potential of their teams and individuals. So I first of all want to welcome you, Ellie, to the show. How are you?
Thank you,
Great to
Tim.
have you
Doing
here.
well. Great to be here with you.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to speaking about how you are able to help modern organizations really translate those aspirational values into behaviors, structures, and that environment that you have mastered in creating for these companies. You inspire many organizations, but I want to learn what really inspires you to drive these organizations to perform at their best, personally and on a professional level as well. Let's start with that.
Sure, absolutely. Well, I will start on a personal level. I would say that what inspires me more than anything is my daughter. I have an 18-month-old named Amelia, and seeing the world through her eyes inspires me every day. And motherhood as a whole has really been inspirational. It's changed so much. I've learned so many skills and coping mechanisms, and it's also really helped me redefine strength. I think before I became a mom, I thought that strength was kind of fighting to overcome something. And now I understand a different type of strength that's really about enduring until something passes. So I have felt a lot of inspiration from being a mom in terms of, being resilient and able to operate under a lot of uncertainty and challenge. Beyond my daughter, I find a lot of inspiration in community and also through reading. I'm an avid reader and I read for about an hour and a half every day across fiction, nonfiction, business, finance, psychology, history, organizational psychology, really anything. So I draw a lot of inspiration from stories of people who are brave enough to fail and pick themselves up and continue forward with integrity.
Yeah. Well, I want to stay true to my promise, and I'm just curious what you think were some of the secrets to you doing so well through your studies. What do you think was drove that, and then how did you keep it going throughout your career as well?
Oh, that's such a great question. I would say I'm someone that does very well with structure and routine and discipline, or rather discipline I often think is just being a creature of habit. And so when I was in college, my dad gave me really great advice that school is my job. And that means every Monday through Friday, 9 to 5 minimum, I should be either in class or I should be studying. And so I think where a lot of classmates maybe felt overwhelmed with the freedom and had a lot of fun during those hours. Instead, I treated school as my job, and 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, I was studying. A lot more beyond that, but at a minimum. I also
Mhm.
had a strategy of mastering the material early on in the semester. So for the
Mhm.
first 3 weeks of school, I absolutely attacked the material every day until I felt really confident in that. And I found if I could really tackle that first month and master that material, it
Mhm.
was much easier to succeed academically. It was much harder to catch up later on if I didn't take that first month seriously.
Yeah. Yeah, great. And what about, professionally? How some of your first roles were already within management consulting, is based on what I've read about you. You worked at Georgetown Law as well, right? But
Mhm.
you got familiar with how organizations run pretty quickly after graduating, correct?
Yes, I would say so, and I think a great degree in terms of, what was helpful in doing that was just taking radical levels of personal responsibility for my performance, even
Hmm.
if I was on a challenging project where, we weren't necessarily set up for success, I was still responsible anyways, and it was very helpful to take that student mindset and study material, so I would often read documents that no one really felt like reading, do the work that no one felt like doing. But if you do that, you have the knowledge that no one else has. And so that was very beneficial for me as well. And then additionally, emotional intelligence is everything, in my opinion. Technical knowledge is excellent, but unless it is paired with emotional intelligence, there's a lot left to be desired. And so in my career, I cared not only to learn and understand the organizational landscape, but also the political, social, and emotional landscape as well among leadership teams, delivery teams as well. And so I think understanding the process and business aspect was key, but pairing that with the people and social understanding of organizations was very helpful.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, since we touched on organizations, there is a disconnect between metrics and culture in many leaders' minds to this day, which may or may not be founded, because metrics and KPIs that we design impact our organizational culture and behaviors, which in turn also determines whether or not we meet our goals that we aspire and hit our targets. Yet most organizations separate these two concepts. My question is, how do you connect your company's values to results and define impact from the leadership or executive's perspective versus from the employee's perspective? What are some tips that you have for organizations to bridge this gap?
Absolutely. This is a topic that I care a lot about because metrics can have so many effects on an organization, some intended, some not necessarily intended. And I believe that what we measure matters. And so what matters must be measured. The biggest issue that I see with metrics is the emphasis on individual success rather than collective success. And in my observation, success within organizations is always a team effort. Yet many metrics actually focus only on individual aspects. So the
Mhm.
issue here is that if you measure individual measures, you will drive individualistic behaviors. But for optimal performance, we need to drive collective behaviors and interdependent behaviors. So individual measures like financial targets, patient outcomes being compared between service units even, that
Mhm.
can inadvertently create competition and defensiveness, and that really undermines collaboration and overall success. So when I work with executives, I encourage them to balance individual metrics with collective metrics. That can involve looking at perceived trust, psychological safety, even the approachability and warmth of leaders can be measured. And although sometimes people perceive those as soft dimensions, they're not. They are tied through research to observable leadership behaviors that drive business outcomes. So leadership teams, they need to also include input from employees that are delivering care or services on the ground, because without those employee voices in the room, executives are at risk of creating incomplete or even harmful metrics. And to give a recent example, I have been advising one of the largest health systems in the United States. One of the aspects of this work is around improving the procurement process. So the organization implemented metrics around the time to close for procurement tickets, and procurement officers became under pressure to have a short duration of those tickets. So what happened? They would close the tickets without completing the customer's request, open a new ticket, and start the process all over again. So what was the North Star here should have been customer satisfaction. But by measuring at an individualistic level, the organization accidentally directly created a great degree of customer dissatisfaction. And that's why it's so important to consider the collective impact of any metrics that will be implemented.
Yeah. So you're speaking about customer satisfaction, and let's also consider and the experience as well, the customer experience, and that's what leads me to the next question, which is based on something that I lived through myself, Ellie, trying to implement a new company culture initiative on a team, a startup company, during difficult times, unpredictable times, COVID, and just like in other situations, once again, some of the most common objectives I encountered, and I see companies do that consistently when implementing such initiatives, is that our team is too small, it's nimble, we do not need a new program, there's no problem in performance currently. Right? Why do we need this vendor to tell us what to do? Right? How well we work has to happen organically. We don't need someone else, or it shouldn't be prescribed by others. So many organizations, I think, they continue to still hire consultants only when they notice a problem, right? And they consider that engagement an episode or an intervention that's limited to a few months or a year. What's your perspective and strategy on when businesses need to consider companies like yours, and why in today's business environment?
That's an excellent question. And I would go back to the question around, is this work necessary? Why do we need this? And when I say this work, specifically what I mean is team effectiveness strategies around assessing the health of a team and creating targeted interventions to support performance. So in my experience, it is basically unheard of to assess a team and find everything satisfactory. That's universal. Every single team I have assessed really needed this work, even if not everybody believed that. And in terms of when companies or organizations bring me in, they usually bring me in during or soon after times of change. That could be leadership transitions, reorganizations, rebuilding after layoffs. These are critical moments for team effectiveness. I also have been engaged when there is a degree of stagnation, and that could include low engagement, missed performance metrics, or even uncertainty about what's blocking success. And specifically in today's business environment, I believe that this work is actually more critical than ever. From what I'm seeing, margins are thinner, funding is evaporating, layoffs are creating a great degree of fear and anxiety. And this fear, it causes employees to operate from a place of self-protection instead of innovation, and this damages performance. And when we look at a neurological level, specifically what's happening here is that this fear and anxiety, it triggers our amygdala, the lizard brain, to come online, and that's responsible for fight, flight, self-protection. What we want to do is cool down the temperature of the nervous system so that our prefrontal cortex can come online. That's the area of the brain responsible for higher level thinking, strategy, and positive social and emotional behaviors. So organizations really need to take seriously fear and anxiety that their employees are experiencing, because that fear and anxiety, apart from being unpleasant and not at all comfortable, it also damages the business and patient outcomes. So organizations additionally cannot afford to lose top performers right now. That's very important. I don't think it's being discussed enough. It is an employer market right now, but that does not mean top performers will stay. Top performers will always have options. And McKinsey has actually found that a top performer delivers up to 8 times the output of an average performer. So because of that, organizations need to protect those top performers now more than ever. Financially, they cannot afford to lose them. And then when I think about the ROI in terms of business outcomes, in my experience, team effectiveness strategies typically deliver about 40 times the investment, which is incredible. So I would expect a $10,000 engagement around team effectiveness to very reliably produce roughly 400,000 in added value. That can look like retention of top performers, improved outcomes, increase of sales, decrease of project timelines. The benefits are really incredible. And for businesses right now, I would say invest in team effectiveness strategies, not only to retain those high performing top performers that we discussed, but also to unlock untapped potential and make sure that no money is left on the table, because financial security is everything right now. Survival is everything. And the financial return on team effectiveness is very clear.
Yeah. Well, Ellie, we're going to have a recap of this conversation that Amadev Pharma will publish on our blog, and I'll ask you for some of those references that we can share with our viewers as well. That because I'm very interested in kind of digging a little bit deeper into some of that data too, that research. So you mentioned top performers, Ellie, and when I think of top performers, I think of them as being self-driven, right? And kind of makes me think about one quote that I like to use a lot that's been attributed to Henry David Thoreau, that the best government is the one that's least managed. Right? Ultimately, that's where you want to get, right? After your consulting, after your leadership in some of the companies that you engage with. So what's your approach to creating the kinds of teams in business that continue to strive to succeed and remain self-driven after you complete your program, for example?
Being self-driven is a key ingredient of a successful team member. But I would share another quote, which is a favorite of mine. It's a Freud quote, which I understand is not necessarily straightforward, but the quote is, "How bold one gets when one is certain of being loved." And you can replace loved with other types of words: safe, trusted, respected. How bold one gets when one is certain of being loved. And so, yes, self-drive matters, but until we know that we are safe in our environment, we don't really have the permission to bring our best, boldest selves to the table. So in terms of my approach, my goal is not to stay forever. I always want to leave organizations better than I left them and help them succeed on their own. So I will bring tools, structures, processes, coaching, norms development to help teams identify what works for them, but they remain the architects of their own culture and their own performance. So I will guide teams to build operating procedures, battle rhythms, coach them through the early iterations so that they can sustain those practices independently. A common example would be to use retrospectives. It's a term from Agile. And retrospectives involve a team reflecting on what is working, what maybe is not working, and what should stop, start, or continue moving forward. Nearly every single team that I work with adopts retrospectives as a long-term practice, could be quarterly, monthly, but it's very important to have that as a common practice. And I would say it's very helpful as well, although the self-drive is key, having an outsider to come in and help shape cultural changes can be very important, because it lowers the bravery bar, I would say. It can be very hard for insiders to introduce new practices or rock the boat. But as an
Mhm.
external consultant, I provide a bit of cover. So once teams work
Mhm.
with me and I introduce these new concepts, they can experiment, we work together. And in my experience, when I do leave teams, they use these strategies long after I'm gone. So I know that the self-drive really works.
Yeah. Yeah. You mentioned self-protection. That a lot of leaders operate out of that objective of protecting themselves, their own teams, right? That we versus they, even across different business units, from sales and marketing, from example, or training. When resources are low or launch is not doing very well, usually executives cut the marketing or training efforts, which is yet nevertheless so critical to success, from some of my experiences that I've in observations. So it's really being able to describe reality as it is, that often, I believe, determines success. And again, a quote from Edwin Friedman, that in any situation, the person who can most accurately describe reality without laying blame will emerge as the leader, whether designated or not.
Mm,
I like that quote, about which I learned during the COVID pandemic, again, with this launch of a first in class product. And so I want to, know, how do you integrate the kinds of rules or structures, that discipline that all organizations need, that you talked about, that favor reality over perception, to
mm,
make organizations make faster and better decisions earlier and more often.
mhm. That's a great question. I think that something that stands out to me from what you said is describing reality without blame. I think
Mhm.
that's critically important. And to
Mhm.
describe reality without blame, it requires perspective taking and empathy, recognizing the difference between intent and impact. And those are all emotionally intelligent behaviors, I should say. The most effective leaders that I see, the most effective organizations are those where there is a cultural norm of managing your emotions and self-regulating. It's not something that's talked about enough, but it is critically important for healthy work environments, healthy teams, and effective leaders. I've seen in my coaching with executives that leadership is incredibly emotionally taxing. And those that face that truth, that reality, and manage it well will greatly outperform those that do not or try to ignore emotions. I coach leaders to recognize, name, process emotions, and then regulate specifically their nervous systems so that they can return to that calm, strategic decision making in the prefrontal cortex,
Mhm.
and to guide their decisions. It's key. And psychological safety, that is essential for favoring reality over perception as well, but it isn't achieved by rules alone. It comes from really a cultural transformation over time. So although these topics can be a bit more subjective, and I often find that some leaders, particularly in STEM, might not be comfortable talking about emotional regulation, although some are excellent at this.
Mhm. Mhm.
These strategies, they are key business drivers. I've seen tangible financial performance associated with making these changes. So I encourage organizations to define the observable behaviors in their career development, promotion frameworks, et cetera, like empathy and communication, perspective taking. It must be a part of how we select and promote leaders. In terms of what you said around rules and structures, I find that really it's about supporting teams to create the discipline that they feel is necessary. And when I say discipline, I mean habits sustained over time. That's where co-authorship is key. Working with
Mhm.
teams to understand what they believe is needed to improve their effectiveness and coaching them to bring that to life is everything. Team effectiveness, it can't simply be top down.
Some of the best ideas are bottom up, and they need the voice to make their ideas count. What proportion of your clients are in healthcare? What industries do you work with? Maybe our viewers should know about that.
Sure, absolutely. I work across industries as long as there is a degree of innovation involved because
Okay.
psychological safety is the underpinning of innovation cultures.
Mhm.
The large portfolio of my clients is in the healthcare and life sciences
Okay.
industry. Right now, 100% of my clients are in healthcare and life
Oh, great.
sciences. So it's definitely an area that I really care about. I believe that having healthy cultures, innovation cultures in healthcare and life sciences will lead to incredible outcomes for the world. So it's an area that I care deeply about, and that's where my clients are.
Yeah. Okay. So great. So let's talk about some of the gaps in healthcare. As you know, we're making large leaps in innovation, advancing precision medicine, but our healthcare systems are not always fit for these types of treatments. Early screening, diagnosing that needs a lot of resources. And also, there's a lot of tremendous, I would say, actually, uncertainty in the future research or volatility currently in healthcare. What are some specific approaches that you're using?
Absolutely. And in your question, hearing kind of unpredictable high pressure
Yeah.
situations, it's very much the norm right now. Absolutely. That's the operating rhythm for every team that I am currently supporting.
Mhm,
I would
mhm,
say, going back to what we said before around emotional regulation, before strategy can really take hold, leaders do need to be well regulated internally among themselves, their teams as well. So I help my clients create calm and get regulated where they can come from a place that is secure, well informed, and strategic to be brave enough to take bold action. Specifically, we work on mindset strategies. We also work on letting go of perfectionism. I find that a lot of executives feel pressure to perfect and perform instead of being bold and experimenting and refining. The most effective executives that I coach are those that are more comfortable with experimentation and refinement versus those that are concerned about making a mistake or a failure. Imposter syndrome is also almost universal. That's really necessary to address through deep coaching as well.
mhm,
And so I encourage leaders to also, in these uncertain times, clarify what is within their control and what is not. So I like to use also prioritization tools like the Eisenhower matrix, as well as more effective delegation strategies, so that I can work with leaders to understand everything that's on their plate. And then
mhm,
we analyze it based on urgency and priority.
mhm,
For those that are urgent, high priority, we need to find the right mindset strategies to support that work. And then anywhere that can be delegated, leaders need support delegating effectively. That's actually an incredibly challenging skill for most leaders is effective delegation and management. So I work with leaders to improve those strategies and to also understand, when we are responsible for metrics and measures that are outside of our control, there's a degree of letting go that is very psychologically healthy. And so I work with leaders to find mantras, visualizations, approaches to kind of learn to surrender a bit so that what is in their control, they're able to address it with all of their talent and might and the talent of their teams. And what's outside of their control, they are supported with the right mindset strategies to release that stress and focus on what they can address effectively.
yeah, a lot of great points you brought up there, and I'm sure we can have many conversations. And then hopefully you will be back on the Alloutcoach show, particularly about perfectionism, right? Really letting go of perfectionism. I really appreciated your points about that here, and all the sequela that it leads to for organizations, for individuals as well. We had a previous guest here, Michael Rubin from Netflix, who talked about how the CEO, Reed Hastings, of course, told him and his other five directors about making a $1 million mistake. He actually encouraged making mistakes and failures, but provided a very Socratic method that challenged leaders who would ask for a particular budget at the same time. But and so this is an example of a successful company that I think is a modern organization that has stayed around and keeps evolving and growing, that embraces failure, right, and learning from failure. So how do you define a modern organization? just today?
That's an excellent question. And I have to say, I love the example that you gave. I will be learning a lot more about that specifically. Personally, I define modern businesses as those that understand emotional intelligence as part of the equation for business success, even
Okay.
in science and technology settings.
Mhm.
Innovation cultures, teamwork, these all require emotional intelligence, self-regulation, and team effectiveness. These are business imperatives. These are not soft skills. And I think that differentiates the companies that will succeed versus those that will flounder and ultimately not adapt to our current times. Successful modern businesses, they take responsibility for creating the architecture where teams can thrive. That means emotionally healthy, psychologically safe cultures where people can bring their best selves to work, do their boldest, bravest work. Because, like you said, with the example with Netflix, not only is it so important to make mistakes so we can learn from them,
Mm.
but unless we are in an organizational culture where we have the safety to share our mistakes, others will not get to learn from our mistakes. And so you will have your teams learning the same lessons over and over again through the same expensive mistakes over and over again. So if you have a culture where mistakes are allowed to be made without punishment and people are safe enough to share those mistakes, the learning that you can enable will be exponentially faster and more robust than an organization where people operate from a place of self-protection. And so specifically in my framework, it is rooted in research. Think industry research like Google's Project Aristotle, academic research like Harvard's Dr. Amy Edmondson. And my framework is founded on four specific pillars. They're the components of high-performing teams. Psychological safety is about 60% of my framework. And then it also includes belonging, clarity, and purpose. Psychological safety, we've talked a little bit about it already, but it ensures that people can take risks without interpersonal fear. Psychological safety does not mean that people are always nice to each other, that there's no conflict, that sunshine and rainbows are above business outcomes. That is not what psychological safety is. Psychological safety is about enabling informed risk taking and learning, and it is a business imperative. Belonging, that involves people supporting one another as people, which is essential for teamwork and learning from each other's mistakes. Clarity ensures that everyone knows their role, their team's role, and expectations. You would be amazed how many times I go into a team and assess them for the first time. And not only can people not name what others are there to do, they can't name what they are there to do. That is incredibly common.
Hmm.
Yes. And then purpose is important as well. That
Mhm.
ensures people know why their work matters, how it ties to the bigger picture.
Mhm.
So a well-architected team, it embodies these four core pillars. These teams can adapt, they can build momentum, they can sustain performance through crises, and
Mhm.
that is absolutely essential. So if an organization out there considers themselves a modern business, a modern organization, I
Yeah.
would ask, is emotional intelligence a core component of how you do what you do? And if it is, then I would be very optimistic about their success in the future.
Oh, very nice way to put it. Well, Ellie, I'm truly honored and privileged to have you as a guest on my show, where, as you know, sportsmanship meets the scientific method, and where the slogan is stretch yourself, lift others.
Mhm.
I've read your case study where you took an organization from chaos to clarity, as you have referred it. You provide lots of details in the documents and that you have, of course, available at your company. But I'd like you to share one of your many stories where you have created champions in the organizations you worked with, and how that impacted you as well.
Sure, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. My favorite story, I should say, is a recent case study that you mentioned that I say often. It involved a financial services organization that had about 5,000 employees, and this team in particular was tasked with a very high visibility cybersecurity initiative. It was worth
Mm.
tens of millions of dollars. And the team, when I assessed it, it was, I would say, a mosaic of different vendors, contractors, full-time staff. There was no teaming agreement in place. There was a high degree of ambiguity, a high degree of pressure and uncertainty. And the leader was also a new leader that was brand new to the enterprise and did not have an internal relationship network to rely on. So on our first assessment, the health of this team was not ideal. The team effectiveness scores were around 2.5 out of 5, which I would characterize as being critically low. I conducted 8 weeks of targeted intervention strategies, which involved a variety of efforts. But in that time, the scores rose to 4.8 out of 5, which was an incredible turnaround for 8 weeks. And those
Oh,
scores,
yeah, short period of time. Yeah.
yeah, thank you. And those scores hovered around 4.9 out of 5 for over 18 months. So it was a sustaining change that we were able to realize. And
Yep.
in that time, this team specifically increased sales, their revenue by 11x. They had 0% regrettable turnover among top performers, which was very rare. That was a 13% improvement just within the first 6 months. This team also accelerated delivery by 6 months, saving, I think, 1.3 million alone just by that change. This team also applied for funding for an internal initiative, and they received more than 20% of they received the full funding they asked for, and then another 20% due to their performance. And the C-suite of this enterprise recognized this team as being the top performing team in that 5,000 employee enterprise. And personally, I would say the work was very fulfilling as well. People said that it was their favorite team they'd ever been on, which I love to hear. But
Yeah.
financially speaking, the ROI, the return on investment, was staggering. So this team of 12 individuals enabled over 4.5 million in added value. And in terms of the consulting fees required for that team effectiveness work, this organization was able to realize a 45x return on investment, which is very rare. That level of impact, if that could be achieved with one 12-person team, when I looked at if this work was scaled across the enterprise, it could have led to 1.9 billion in added value if the entire enterprise adapted this way of working. So this is why I believe so fully in the value of team effectiveness. Yes, I care about it from the human impact perspective. And equally, I care about the financial performance that this can enable. We are living in times where we cannot leave money on the table. We cannot miss out on any opportunity to realize value. And
Right.
without team effectiveness strategies, organizations are leaving money on the leaving money on the table. And as you can see from that case study, it's a significant amount that they're leaving on the table.
Yeah, absolutely. That's the reality there.
Mhm.
That's how you describe the reality and the impact of just using that kind of strategy.
Mhm.
Yeah. Well, connect with Ellie. This is a champion who will create leaders on your teams. Ellie, it's been a pleasure. I want to invite you to the Medical Innovation Olympics in October as well. Please participate. I think you will particularly have a lot of great insights to share with our community there. And I hope to see you soon on the Alloutcoach show again, Ellie.
Thank you.
Any final parting words for
Yes.
viewers of Alloutcoach?
Thank you so much, Tim. I would say, start small. If you're exploring team effectiveness strategies, you don't have to transform everything overnight. I've actually created a very light touch assessment to support leaders that want to analyze the health and effectiveness of their teams. It's called the team health assessment. I can provide the link for you for the show notes.
Yeah.
It takes less than 3 minutes. You get a high level snapshot of the health of your teams, as well as some recommendations to consider for improving. And, I also encourage any listeners to reach out for support. I'm here. I'm always happy to get on the phone and talk through team effectiveness, the health of organizations, and how we can create not only stronger financial performance, but healthier workplaces and more effective leaders for the benefit of all of us. So please do reach out. And thank you so much for having me, Tim.
Thank you. I have more topics and more questions for our next conversation already in mind. So hope to see you soon.
Absolutely. I look forward to it. Thank you so much, Tim.
Thank you.